So I'm going to bring forward, if I may slightly, our summary from Jane Beavis, Public Affairs Director at British Retail Consortium, and Julian Walker-Palin again from ASDA. So if Jane and Julian, you'd like to come up, that would be fabulous. And do you want the lectern, or are you going to sit? Which is entirely up to you.
Far too late in the day.
Okay, then do sit.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. To those of you who I haven't yet met or talked to, and I was really pleased to be involved in this day, because to have this many people in one room trying to come up with some solutions to some common problems is really quite an exciting thing to be involved in. And I just sort of stepped back a little bit to think about, in the 5 years that I've been at the BRC, what's changed, what stays the same? Well, the obvious thing that's changed is the state of the economy. And whereas sustainability and being green was all about sort of being seen to be doing the right thing, being socially responsible 5 years ago, I think there's a much keener feeling now that actually it's about doing good business. It's about using your resources, cutting out cost, doing all of that more cleverly. And so I think far from perhaps some of the messages that the Chancellor puts across from time to time, there's never been a time where it's been more important in the last 50 years actually to take sustainability seriously and really address it. I'm going to talk a little bit about two groups of people who haven't really been in the room today. The first is the consumer, and the second is government and what their role is in all of this. Obviously, consumers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and have different concerns. There are a group of consumers who are very keen to actively make their own choices and decide how to engage with the sustainability agenda. There's probably a rather larger group of consumers who are broadly sympathetic to sustainability as an issue, but actually have a long list of their own problems, including getting the kids home and fed, balancing the household budget, juggling work and home life and all of that, and want retailers and the makers of the products they consume to take the problem away from them and sort it out, and just trust that brand to have solved the problem for them. So some of the discussions that we've had today, and I think it's come out in the summaries that we've just heard, is actually at the moment certain consumer preferences are pushing us to do the wrong thing, and how do we take our consumers a bit further on that journey so that we can move forward. And on my table in particular, we had a long discussion about black plastic trays and all of that, and why consumers prefer them, and what the problems are. So there are some very sort of knotty problems that we need to sort of get into on some of this stuff. How do we take action on that? And I think, Stuart Rose's reflection that you can be half a step in front of your customer but not really any further than that is one that we need to hang on to. I think retailers are, particularly the large retailers, are very proud to be taking their customers on a journey, but are very careful as to how they continue to interact with their customers as to how to achieve that. And there are some very good labelling schemes, incentive schemes for customers, etc., which help with that, which reinforce the messages. But the I like green but I'm busy type message is one that comes back fairly clearly. We do need to find some ways to provide good incentives to customers to do some of the right things. And some of that comes to the second group I mentioned, and that is government. What is government doing to help us? Well, of course, we have to put an S at the end of that particular term these days. We have 4 different national governments in the UK, as well as many different decisions that are made at local authority level. And particularly for those of us who are discussing waste, you know, there's all the misery around having 300 and odd different regimes in terms of the way waste is collected and the messages, confusing messages that are sent to customers about what's recyclable and what's not on that. So governments can help by helping broker exactly these sorts of collaborations through bodies like Courtauld and the work that RAP does with many of you in the room, and underpinning that with a certain amount of funding and helping provide a safe environment where the market isn't naturally throwing up that sort of thing. Governments can help fund certain things and provide fiscal incentives, or through the Green Investment Bank provide other opportunities for finance. And I was really interested to hear the references to the difficulties of accessing finance for that sort of innovation at the moment. Clearly there's an awful lot around regulation, and in this particular field, obviously you have to bring Brussels and European regulation in as well. And there, what we need is regulatory frameworks that still allow and enable innovation to happen. So what we don't need is the sort of environmental regulation that came out in the batteries directive that said retailers must take batteries back in store without thinking, actually, how do consumers want to do this? Because the research here in the UK showed that curbside collection was by far the most effective way of achieving that. So we need the right sort of regulation, and sometimes we need little bits of regulation that actually help new markets grow up and new innovations come in from the private sector. I think it's a moot point as to whether we are getting all of those sorts of supports now, or they're getting the sorts of profiling that we need. The level of political engagement, particularly in Westminster, and perhaps the calibre of the politicians that go into the 2 departments that are responsible for many of these areas, leaves one to be less enthusiastic than perhaps one was a couple of years ago. But because we've got 4 UK governments, there's a certain amount of competition between them, and I think there's some good practice out there, and it behoves all of us to encourage our political leaders to help us do the important role we have in delivering greater sustainabilities, and to engage our customers and society as a whole as we take that forward.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. Quick round of applause for Jane. So, Julian, you have our keynote final closing words.
That sounds very posh. I know far better than to keep corporate people from free drinks, though, so and I won't be too long, but it's been a while since you and I were on a panel together, so this is rather nice. I think, for me, the reflections from today is that this has to be the right direction to try and tackle some of these big issues. And in that, I mean collaboration. What's really surprised me is the level of energy from today. Actually, it was a pretty long day. If you remember, we were here before 9 o'clock this morning, and it was best part of 5 o'clock this evening. But actually, everyone's been really engaged. And I think that's what happens when you bring people with an interest in the subject and with a view on how it could be fixed, but without having all of that within their control. So we all need each other in order to be able to unlock a piece of the issue, so the jigsaw comes together and we can start to make progress. And I think this conference has really helped to move that forward a notch. If I think back to last June, I was sitting in a board meeting of Asda's exec, and we were talking about this very issue. We're saying, how do we start to make greater progress in our supply chain to help our supply chain to become more sustainable? And we had all the main names of Asda there, including Andy Clark, our CEO. And we were looking at a piece of activity we'd done with 2 Degrees, which we call the Asda Sustain and Save Exchange, which was our toe in the water, was if we form a collaboration space and we put a number of suppliers on there. In our case, for the pilot, it was 72 of our largest fresh food suppliers. And fresh food is produce, meat, fish, poultry, and bakery. Can we create this space that really gives some benefit back to those suppliers and gives some indirect benefit to us by those suppliers being stronger, being more fit for the future, being more efficient? So we ran this pilot, we unpicked it, and then to my delight, and we haven't actually announced this as yet, this is the first time we've told anybody publicly, we then got approval to extend that across the whole of our fresh and frozen category. So we're actually in the process now of taking about £12 billion worth of EPOS sales, so a large number of our suppliers, and bringing them onto this tool that we call the Asda Sustain and Save Exchange. We're funding that ourselves, so it is a free tool for our suppliers to use. And those suppliers range from some extremely large names at the top to some very, very small SMEs, particularly with the S at the bottom. So we need to make sure that it's flexible to meet the needs from all of those different types of suppliers. But crucially, our project sponsor is Barry Williams, and Barry Williams is our food trading director on the board. And he is a strategic thinker, so he's looking ahead at issues he sees coming down the line and how he can get ahead of those issues rather than right now, how can we save a couple of quid? So he's given us a golden rule for this exchange, which is our buyers are not allowed to go after the savings from the exchange directly. They don't actually see the savings from the exchange. So really interesting earlier when you were talking about how do we get this trust? How do you stop going after these savings, please, supermarkets? And a lot of that was aimed at us. That's how we're doing it, by giving a cast iron guarantee that in essence, we're developing a free tool that will have free information, best-in-class information, collaboration in lots of different formats between those suppliers. It might be face-to-face. So for example, we've invited some of our suppliers down to our chilled distribution centre in Lutterworth in a couple of weeks' time, where we're going to open up our fridge and freezer policy. We're going to walk around the depot, we're going to say why we do things in the way that we do, how much it saved us, what type of technology we use, and we're just sharing that freely with our supply base. And then we hope, and we've seen this work during the pilot, that suppliers will feel they can then share with others what they're doing, and then everybody becomes more sustainable together. Benefit for us is we have a stronger supply base that is more fit for the future as we see more resource scarcity hit. So certainly the biggest takeaway for me was collaboration and how it actually works. It works in person, and it works, I think, if you can create the right environment with the right amount of trust and then with the right tool to bring that together. So I just want to thank everybody today. I also want to thank the 2 Degrees team that put this together, so perhaps we can put our hands together for those guys. They've done a good job.